any marketing strategy, it has to be holistic. It can't be like one thing, right? How do you capture the imagination of your consumer? And what do they want to hear? And then develop your marketing strategy.
On this episode, we have Olivia Leonard, Senior Director of Product Marketing at Meta. She talks about juggling a full-time role, as well as having her own business, Meta and the future of the Metaverse, and also implementing social strategies within your business.
I often would get up at 6 in the morning. I do some little gym work before I go into the office. I go into the office and do my day job. And often I do some work at night for the little gym. And that was kind of Monday to Friday. I suppose being a mom, I think of my kids and what the metaverse will look like in their world. And I think of the metaverse in terms of like how people can learn in a way that's going to be suited to them. It's going to shift how we operate as a globe. I think with any technology, you have to look around the corners, right? And I think for the metaverse, we have a huge amount of learnings from what we've built to date as to what we can bring forward. You can't really explain it till you do it. And once you try it once, then you're like, okay, I totally get this.
Olivia, since we last spoke, you took on a new chair position. How's that experience been?
Yeah, it's been fantastic. So I've been on the board of Forest for 5 years, and in May I stepped up to the chair position. So it's been fantastic. It's actually been quite different to be at the board meeting as chair as opposed to an independent non-exec director. So you definitely have to think about the meeting slightly differently in terms of how you prepare and how you show up. But it's been a fantastic experience.
Okay. And you had other chair positions in the past?
I had a voluntary chair position a few years ago where I chaired the Traditional Irish Horse Board. And that was where we were negotiating with Horse Sport Ireland in terms of the position of Traditional Irish Horse Board. And the Traditional Irish Horse Board is focused on ensuring that traditional breeding of Irish horses happens across the country.
Okay. I guess in terms of your own upbringing, you grew up on a farm, your father and your brother are both jockeys. How did that inform your work and your future career?
Yeah, well, I guess it's probably why I ended up on the Traditional Irish Horse Board chair for the start. My dad is very passionate about this. But yeah, definitely growing up on a farm has been probably instrumental in terms of life in general. It was actually Ronan of Forest, who's the CEO of Forest, said to me when he first brought me on the board, he was like, "You work really hard. Is that because you grew up on a farm?" And I thought it was a kind of an interesting connection between the two things, but he's probably right. I think when you grow up on a farm, you just have a very strong work ethic from the day go. We always laughed that my dad had 8 children because he wanted a lot of employees on the farm. I was number 8 in the family. And I think when you grow up in an environment that is focused on like a job has to be done every day, whether it's like sheep have to be sheared or hay has to be brought in or cattle have to be counted, and that job has to be done. There's no give on it. By default then as a family, we just all rode in and worked together. So my dad used to put the jobs on a board every day and you put your name against the job that you were going to do and off you went. So actually in one way he was quite liberal in his thought process. There was no gender definition in the jobs. It didn't matter. We were 4 boys and 4 girls. So you signed up to whatever you were most interested in. And then, everything was up for grabs. So if you wanted to drive the forage harvester versus if you wanted to ride a horse, that was totally based on what you wanted to do best. So I do think that kind of brought a work ethic into my life early on. It also made me make choices early on in terms of what I wanted to do in life. Like I always knew I was not going to be a farmer later on in life. Although it's a wonderful career, it's also a 24/7 career. So it definitely guided me probably in the route I wanted to go.
Did you show back then growing up the leadership traits that you've brought into business now?
Probably not so much on the farm because I'm from a family of leaders, and being the baby, then your role in the family is slightly different. I would say where it showed up earliest was actually in sport. So I was always the person on the hockey pitch shouting at everyone, like pass, move, get together, bringing the team together, huddling up. And this time we were like 12, 13, 14. You don't even realize you're doing it. But I was always the talker and the pull together person on the teams, on sports teams that I played on. So that's probably where I saw first, where I was naturally quite comfortable to like, all right, here's our plan. What are we doing? Let's get together and to motivate the team. And then I guess as I went on into university, I started to see it more. So it's certainly a seat I'm comfortable in. I'm happy to be the leader. I don't lean back away from it. Because if I vision and I see an opportunity, like on the hockey pitch, I'm like, here's how we can score, like trying to get everyone to see sort of the same goal. I get a lot of fun and excitement out of that.
Do you think leadership is taught, or do you think it's something that you're born with, or something just that you learn as you go on?
Well, I think it comes in many different styles. So I think, because sometimes we have an idea that it's a certain way, but I think leaders can be very effective in very different styles, you know? So I think that I don't think you're necessarily born with it, but I think the encouragement of it is really important. So I think, like, can everybody be a leader? Probably, if they're encouraged in the right way, you know, based on the skills that they bring to the table and what that means for them as a leader. And I think probably people are leaders in different scenarios depending on where their comfort zone is. So I don't really think you're born with it, but I do think the encouragement and the nurturing of it is really important. And I do think the younger you do that, the better. Like I have a daughter, she's 6, her name is Fia, and she's fiery, like she's great, right? And sometimes people will say to me, you know, she's bossy. I'm like, no, 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 she's a future leader. Like never, never quench that. I encourage it. I love it. I see it in her. And I encourage her to like lean in and be vocal and have her point of view. Whereas sometimes, and there's lots of research on this, like girls can be told to be quiet and be pretty and, you know, not speak out against. And I definitely, for my own daughter, I'm really encouraging her to keep that fire alive.
Have you ever struggled, I guess, in terms of adversity, being a female in a leadership position?
Um, I think yes and no. Like I think that there are certainly the playing field can feel a little bit different sometimes, but then it's how you adapt to that. And I think it does come back. You talked about our home. Like we're 4 boys and 4 girls. It was always equal. Like if we were playing tennis or football or whatever, we're from a sporty family, as you can probably pick up. But like whatever sport we were playing, everyone played. It didn't matter if you were the youngest, the smallest. There was no compensations made for you. When I was growing up, I was often put in goals, which was like the worst place to be because people could hammer the ball at you, right? So I think that like it also depends on how you deal with things that you come up against. And you know, if I ever see imbalance or if I ever see something, I'm quite vocal about it. And actually, I had it recently in a board meeting of Forest, probably going back about 6 months ago. We were debating something, and I had a point of view, and I got shut down. I got interrupted by 3 male people on the board. And I actually asked 3 or 4 times to finish my point, and everyone ignored me. They just keep talking over me. And I actually paused the board meeting. This is when I wasn't chair, but I paused the board meeting and I said, like, I really just want to share what just happened there. So I said 80% of all interruptions in any meeting is a man interrupting a woman. And I said, I have 3 people interrupting me and I haven't yet finished my point, and no one has stopped to say, actually, could Livy finish her point? So I said, I'd really like to finish my point. And everyone just kind of stopped, you know, and looked at me. But like, I thought it was a really important moment to say, actually, I want to finish. And this pattern that is happening right here in front of me actually happens all the time. And I spoke to Ronan afterwards saying, like, you know, I'd love you to bring that into your management teams. And, you know, because that data point is well researched. And Meta, where I work today, is if you see someone interrupting someone, you be an ally for them. So, for example, if I saw a female leader being interrupted or a male leader being interrupted, I'd say, actually, I'd really like to hear their point. Can you let them finish? Because it's much easier for an ally to say it than the person to say it for themselves. You should be quite like confident and self-assured to say it for yourself. And sometimes actually as a female, it can come across as aggressive when you say it for yourself. But we have a system in work where you're an ally when you see things like that happen, and you can be an ally to that person and ensure that everyone's point is heard. So I think it happens in the fabric of life, but then it's also how you deal with it and how you address it. And I certainly like to try and address things head on in the moment, no hard feelings, like, but let's just recognize what's happened here and learn from that.
Yeah, I was thinking, obviously, with Meta and Facebook, you know, such a large scaling business. What are some of the challenges that you have encountered while scaling and growing the business?
Yeah, well, gosh, I'm there nearly 11 years now. So I've seen many twists and turns in the business. And obviously today's world is quite different to 10 years ago. So I think when I first started the company, we were about 60 people in Dublin. So it was quite a small office. We were down the Docklands. And it was more around like we didn't have the resources to do what we wanted to do. And there was so much that we wanted to do and go after that we had to be very smart about what we worked on. I think as the business has grown, we've matured as a business. We're kind of like a bit of a gangly teenager now. Like we've matured a lot as a business. We've brought in a lot of like systems, organization, and actually we operate more like a larger organization today, which is great. But that comes with lots of different challenges. Like how do you make sure it's efficient? How do you make sure that you're like driving the right process through the company to get the results that our clients want or that our consumers want, and always keeping that customer lens on. So I think it's changed hugely, but fundamentally, like growing quickly, scaling quickly, bringing in efficiencies, those same themes have stayed through my pattern of work my whole time there.
I guess the challenges with scaling a business, obviously conflict is inevitable.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that inevitable conflict yourself?
Yeah, I think it depends on what the conflict is. Like if it's around prioritization of choices, it depends on what the scenario is. But like let's say for example there's a conflict around prioritization and different people want to do different things, right? Like in that scenario, I'd always be very like, well, let's get into a room together or virtually, depending on whether we're in COVID circumstance or not. And actually, let's just talk it through, right? Often there can be like miscontext, or there can be, misunderstanding on certain opportunities versus others, or why is one person leaning one way versus the other. We brought in a really good thing. One of my colleagues did this recently where we actually had a conflict and there was two scenarios and the room was very split on the scenarios. And what we actually had to do is for the scenario we were for, we'd ignore that scenario and we actually had to defend the other side. And we had to re-represent back as if we were actually for the other side. And that was really interesting because it made us think about it from the other perspective. Like often you'll be like, oh, I see the other side, but here's why this is better. Like you constantly will defend why your choice is better. But it actually made us think about it from, I now am for option B. Like I'm now defending option B. So what is good about option B? And it was a really effective way to loosen the tension point in the conflict and actually get people to think about the different perspectives. And some people then after that debate change their perspective on it, which is great, right? Because it's what it's all about. So I think if you ever get, like one thing I find, if you ever get stuck, it's really good to ask people, we call it switching chairs, and sit in the chair of the other person and see actually how you view the world from that perspective.
Yeah, it's always about changing perspective. And obviously someone like yourself, you're very confident, you're very vocal, you're very strong. What about people who may lack that confidence or being strong and vocal? What advice would you give to them?
Yeah, I think, and I think there's also very different personalities in a room. So you need to be careful, like particularly when you're having a debate, that it's not like one or two voices that are loudest and therefore that's what gets heard. So I think there's like, firstly ensuring that everyone's voice is heard. And sometimes you need to give space for that. So some people may like to like think about it a bit more on their own and then come back with a recommendation. So it may not be in that moment that their point of view is shared. Or it may just be a case of like ensuring if you're like facilitating the meeting, that you're drawing people in. So you may say, hey, like, I don't know, Mayor, person X, right? We haven't heard from you. What are you thinking about? Or how are you thinking about this? And making sure that you draw everybody in. Because otherwise, like, diversity of thought is only useful if the diversity of thought is truly coming through. And I think there are ways that you can actually construct conversations and meetings and debates for that to happen. And I do think actually ensuring that we sometimes do like a reflection week on something. So let's say, for example, we make a pretty big decision in the business and we've all the leadership team have all had their voice on it. Sometimes we'll say, let's reflect for a week and we'll come back next Tuesday, first 10 minutes leadership meeting, we reflect on this decision. If anyone has other reflections they want to share at that point, and then we lock it then. And that's quite helpful, I think. If you're someone who likes to mull on things and actually let them sit for a while and see if it sits right with you, versus someone who's like quick to kind of cut through and try and make a decision. And we've all different types of people. So you have to, I think as a leader, it's really important that you're very inclusive to different ways in which people work. And it's your role as a leader to draw the best out of those people, not go with like maybe the loudest voice or the person who is most persuasive.
Yeah, no, that's definitely brilliant advice. What have you learned in your career or in business that you wish you implemented way back when?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. It's an easy one, but not sweat the small stuff. Like I do see it like early in our career. Like I remember it's going back to my Accenture days. I was going for an early promotion. I was like really ambitious. I wanted it. And I didn't get it. And I remember like I was fuming. But like the next promotion cycle was 6 months away. And I got it the next time out, right? So like on the grand scale of a career, it's a very small window. Like I don't even think about that moment now, right? But I remember at the time I was pretty upset. Like I was pretty frustrated by it. So I think that like playing the long game, like, and I think like rather than don't sweat the small stuff, like focus on what you can do. Like focus on where your strengths are and where you can bring really good value. Because I think when you do that, your career stuff will fly along in the background. You don't really need to think about that too much. And it took me a while to kind of figure that out. Like if I just really do great work all the time repetitively, that will pay off, and trust that that will pay off. And I think that it probably took me a while to kind of just trust that. And I think the other thing I think is like take chances. Like when I was in my late 20s, I left consultancy to start my own business, which is a company called The Little Gym, which is very different to consultancy. I remember telling my boss at the time, and I think his words were like, "Are you absolutely crazy?" And he's like, "You're going to leave a consulting job to start a gym for children." He couldn't add the two together, you know. And but actually, he ended up being my mentor for years when I was at The Little Gym. So he was very interested into how this was going to pan out. But like, and it was a risk that like it paid off in some ways, not in the others. Like I opened 6 months before the biggest recession of my lifetime, which is in 2007. So the business took off to a flying start, and then we completely plateaued. So I had to completely change like the model, the operating, the way we operated, our cost base. I had to renegotiate everything. I learned more in that 18 months than I had probably learned in my whole consulting career prior to that, as in real, like, you know, hands-on business tactics. So I think that like I actually, it's interesting. I ended up then joining Meta when I had the little gym, and it was I when I joined the S&B business at Meta, it was very useful to me that I'd run my own business, running the small to medium business at Meta. Because while I was developing products for like lots of small to medium businesses, I actually had my own, so I could walk the walk while actually running the business. So we would launch a product for small to medium businesses, and that weekend I go and test it in my own business, and I'd be able to come back to the engineers and go, that didn't work at all, or my gosh, that was a great product, like I got lots of business out of that. But I had this little incubation hub where I could actually test what we were doing, which I found very beneficial. So I think going back to your point, what would I learn? I would say like take risks, like go for it, you know. And I've come from corporate career into my own business, back into corporate career. Like careers are very fluid now. There's not like a fixed view of the world. And I would argue that actually having done consultancy and my own business is why I was valuable to Facebook back in the day, because they wanted someone who's entrepreneurial, but the consultancy skills are obviously hugely beneficial as well. So that combination was a really nice fit for getting a role at Meta back in whenever it was 2011. So I would say don't sweat the small things and take risks.
How did, like, obviously having the little gym and then Facebook, the SMB business, and growing that from 18 to 400 or crazy numbers like that. How did you juggle it all? How did you
It was
get
really
that done?
hard, actually. Like, I didn't think so. This comes back to the farming background, right? So, like, I worked day and night. So, I often would get up at 6 in the morning. I'd do some little gym work before I go into the office. I go into the office and do my day job. I was also doing triathlons at the time. So, I was trying to train for triathlons in the even time. And often I'd do some work at night for the little gym. And that was kind of Monday to Friday. And then on a Saturday morning, I'd literally put on my little gym Airtex and tracksuit, and I'd go off and teach classes for the day, and often on a Sunday as well. And this went on for about 4 years. I think I can't remember how long I did parallel for about 4 or 5 years. And I do remember at one point my partner sitting me down and saying, like, is this ever going to stop? Like, are you actually ever going to like do one or the other, or you know? And it was funny. Probably actually the tipping point was that we really wanted to have a family. And I met this amazing acupuncturist as I was kind of trying to have a family. And she just said to me, like, where's the room for the baby? And I was like, well, I don't have a baby. I was like, I don't need to make room yet. And she's like, no, but you should make room now. You should think about, like, freeing up some space in your life. Like, you have 2 jobs, you're doing trial. Like, she was kind of looking at my lifestyle going, like, it's completely insane. And it was probably, to hear from someone else, it resonated more with me. It was kind of like an outsider looking in going, this is interesting. And on top of all of this, you want to have a family. So that made me kind of sit down and rethink, like, what am I, like, where do I want to go, and what's my long-term goal? And at the time, an opportunity was sort of on the table to sell the little gym. I was kind of like, oh, I don't want to sell it. It's very hard to sell something you started. You're kind of like, you feel very attached to it. But I made the decision to sell the little gym and focus purely on Meta and having a family.
Very
So
good.
yeah.
So your own business, family, Facebook. Do you ever switch off, or how do you switch off if you ever do?
I'm better now at doing it than I used to be. I'd say in my 20s and 30s I didn't switch off, but I didn't want to. I think when I opened the little gym, I took one day off in 6 months when I first opened, but I didn't feel it because I was so in what I was doing. I was so energized by what I was doing, and when I take it, like I remember that first day or two taking off, like I was frustrated with myself for taking it off because I felt I could have done things to drive the business forward, you know. And I always had like leaflets in the car, flyer. I was always kind of odd. Like even if I was going somewhere, I'd be like, "Oh, here's the little chimney. Like, put that in your pocket or whatever." So I think I probably didn't switch off very much in my early days, but I did things that I really enjoyed. So like my energy was high. I was sleeping well at night. I was waking up energized. I was ready to go again. Weirdly, as I've gotten a little bit older, maybe two kids have made this shift for me. Sleep has become very important to me. So I definitely don't have the same. I guess I'm busy in a different way. So and obviously the kids are my top priority. So like when you're with them, you want to be able to give them 120%. But I find now I kind of fall into bed at night and drag myself out of bed in the morning and kind of have to rev myself up in the morning to go again. And maybe that's age. I'm kind of think about the combination where I used to like bounce out of bed and I don't quite bounce out of bed anymore. But maybe it's just a combination of things. Um, but yeah, I think I'm definitely when I'm in the zone, like I'm all in. I can go for a long time. I'm like in triathlon. I always like the endurance end of it. So the longer the distance, the better it was for me. So whereas the sprints, I kind of found harder because they go very fast, you know. So maybe I'm just an endurance person. You know, I'm in for the long haul.
Yeah, there's so many anecdotes there, I guess, in terms of triathlons and running. There must be quite a lot from that you bring into business as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think with sport, I think there's two things with well, probably three things with sport. There's firstly like team and culture. And I lean on sport a lot in terms of what great culture looks like. Because you've been on amazing like when you've been on an amazing team sport, you know what that feels like. It's pretty unique, you know? And I was fortunate to have been on really good teams where I was like, this is like I would have lived and died for the team, you know? I think the second thing around sport is like we talk a lot about strategy in companies, but actually when you ask people what they mean by strategy, often you get different answers. And I often think of strategy in terms of sport, right? You know, like the goal is to win the game. Maybe the strategy or the objective is to win by 2 goals because you want to go into the next league or whatever that is. And the strategy may be that you're going to play a defensive goal game or you're going to play an attacking game. In order to do that, you're going to put 5 up front and 4 back or whatever that is. And I was like, that's strategy in its simplest form. Like, and I think that when you relay sport to business and you're like, well, what really is our strategy? Like when we think about it, how are we going to break it into like goal, you know, KPI, our strategy and our tactics, and what does that look like? And I think particularly for when you're working, like when you're trying to teach the team on strategy, I find the sports analogy helps cement it in for people. They can kind of relate to that and go, okay, I get that. Okay, how do we now do that for the business? So I think yeah, culture is really key and strategy. And then I think what I've personally gotten out of sport that has helped is like it makes you believe the impossible is possible, right? So like I think when you put a challenge on the board that you don't think is possible and you achieve it, then you're kind of like, okay, like what is actually possible? You know, like I remember when I first put I have a dream board at home, I just stick pictures on it of things I'd like to achieve and I just leave it on the wall. I don't really think too much about it. I'm like, I'd like to do that in the future. And I stick it up and I don't think about how that's going to happen or what that's going to like what that's going to be like other than it's on the dream board. And I remember sticking a marathon on it thinking that'll probably never happen, but we'll stick it up there and see what happens. And I also remember sticking a triathlon up on it, and I'm not a very good swimmer. I'm not cyclist, and I can kind of run, right? And I was thinking, I don't know how that's going to happen, but we'll see what happens, you know. And I completed my 22nd triathlete this summer, so like triathlon this summer. So like, it's amazing what you put out there, then what's possible. And what that makes me then think about is like, okay, so like we limit ourselves in what we think is possible. But I kind of think like, imagine if we what else will I put on my dream board? You know, not everything happens on my dream board, but I'm always quietly surprised by the things I put on. That when I put them on, I was a bit daunted by, and some way, it's managed to manifest itself.
Has that always been an important part of your life, visualization and kind of manifesting things? Is it something you've done since an early age or more recently?
No, probably not that not probably in my 20s. So you know how people like talk about like writing life plans and stuff, and I'm not really a writer. I don't keep diaries. I write letters to people, but outside of that I'm not a big writer per se. So I was like, if I'm not going to write down what I want or write down my vision statements, what way do I do it? And I am a visual person. Like even if I'm buying furniture, I literally want them to lift it out of the store, put it in my house so I can see it, and then I can decide if I'm going to buy it. I can't decide in the shop, you know. And even I went to a furniture shop only yesterday. It turns out they're an online store and they don't have a showroom. But I was going to them because I wanted to see and touch the furniture before I bought it. So I'm very visual. Like I have to almost be able to see it in my mind's eye. So I find that's why for me a dream board worked really well, because the images told, like the story was very clear in my mind, but I didn't need to write the story to know the story. I just needed the image to kind of remind me of what I was dreaming of in the background and not to lose sight of that.
Oh, that's brilliant. In terms of, I guess, sports, business, teamwork is so important. Coaching is so important. Who's your sounding board that you can bounce ideas off?
Yeah, I have a few. I kind of I have different people depending on what's going on for me. So obviously I have my partner who's fantastic, but he listens to me day in, day out. So sometimes I have to like figure out different people that I can bounce ideas off, or when he's tired of the conversation, I might like, okay, I need to bring this to somebody else. I have some really close friends that like I went to school with who I bounce things off. But probably on the business side, my brother Brendan is probably the person I'll go to most, where I'm like, I'm in a quandary, or what do you think? Or like in the role I'm in at Meta at the moment, interestingly, I had been on the Instagram team and this role came up and I was like, do I go for it? Don't I go for it? And he was the person I went to help me kind of weigh up the pros and cons. And he's very good at kind of giving you, he won't tell you what you want to hear, he'll tell you his perspective. And I find that very beneficial. But then I've worked with different people over the years that I've always kept as sort of friends, stroke mentors, and I lean on them depending on what's going on or if I want a different perspective. So I'd say like I've kind of a broad network of people that I lean on depending on what's going on. And like I often say in work, I do a lot of career coaching and work, and I'm like, who are your board of directors for your career? Like who do you have around the table? And I think it takes time to build up that, call it a virtual table for yourself. But I think it's really beneficial. And like I've never had anyone I've ever gone to for advice. No one's ever said, no, Livy, sorry, I can't help you with that. Or no, I can't advise you on that. People are always very willing to give you their time and give you, their thoughts and ideas. And if they can't help, often they'll redirect you in another way. But I think that's a very valuable thing to do, is to build that up over time and have people that you can rely on. Because obviously opportunities are easy to discuss, but it's nearly harder when it's not a good situation and you don't quite know what to do. And that's when you really need people in your corner to help you maybe tease through your own thought process of what's important to you.
What's the best piece of feedback that someone has given you that you've taken on board?
Oh, I got feedback very early in my consulting career that I never forgot. And it was actually from a guy called Sean McNamara, who's still with Accenture, but he works in the US. And I was working on a piece of work and I was pedaling really hard to get it done. We had a deadline and everything. And there was a few pieces that I hadn't landed. We're about 10 days out from go live for the client. And I was completely wound up. Like this is when I actually wasn't sleeping at night at this point. And I was like, I'm actually not going to get it over the line. And I went to him and I was like, Sean, like I'm in trouble here. Like these 3 things I can't do, And literally in front of me, he picked up his phone. Yeah, okay, that one's sorted. What's that? Yeah, that one's sorted. I get that one sorted. And I just looked at him, I was like, you could do these things all along. I was like, I didn't know you could do those things, And he was like, Livy, he said, one piece of advice for you, don't walk the pier alone. And I said, you've walked the pier alone. He said, we're all up at the end watching you at the end of the pier. He said, bring us with you. Bring us with you on the pier walk. So that really stood to me because I probably did walk the pier alone a bit. And now I'm very conscious of not doing that. And actually, it may take longer to walk the pier with 5 or 6 or 8 people. But A, it's a much better journey. It's much more enjoyable. And everyone celebrates at the end. So that probably was the piece of advice that I've carried the most in my career.
Brilliant. Did you know earlier on in your career, in terms of kind of social media marketing, that was something that you were going to get into or have a real interest in?
Yeah, Well, I worked, funny, when you joined consultancy, you got allocated to your area when you joined straight out of university, right? So I was actually assigned to communications and high tech on my first day of consultancy, which may have just been by chance. I don't quite know how the allocation was done, but I'm sure it's a spreadsheet and you're kind of spat out into a particular area. So I joined comms and high tech, and actually a lot of my early clients were on the comms side. So I worked with BT and Nokia, and then I worked with Microsoft, which was sort of more on the tech side. And I was always interested by it. But interestingly, when I opened the little gym and people used to come to me for career advice, I used to always say, you have to join Facebook. Like, you have to join. There's no other company in town to join. You have to join Facebook, And I was sending lots of people to Facebook. And when they reached out to me about an opportunity, I remember saying, like, this is really weird because, like, I'm sending everybody there and there's opportunities in front of me and I don't really want another job. I have my company, but I can't really say no to this because I'm telling everybody to go there and maybe I should walk the walk. And I'd like that. I started with a coffee and a chat with the head of office who was there at the time. And then it rolled into probably 13 interviews and I ended up joining. So perhaps it was always there in my background that I was going to work in high tech. But yeah, I definitely enjoy the high tech side of the house. I enjoy working in technology for like future thinking companies. I think it's just a really exciting place to be.
You must have manifested that call from Facebook, it sounds like.
Yeah, maybe.
Is it on your dream board?
Yeah, it wasn't on my dream board, but maybe I was just putting it out into the universe so much. The universe decided it was going to change my own direction a little bit. But what a great opportunity, and it's been a fantastic company to work for.
Marketing is changing so much. You have influencer marketing, guerrilla marketing. What do you believe social media companies need to do in terms of their strategy? Well, their social media strategy, or businesses should be doing for their social media strategy. Yeah. What's the most important thing to look at? Yeah,
but I think like any marketing strategy, it has to be holistic. It can't be like one thing, right? So, and I think you got to think of it from the perspective of where your consumer's at. So, like, how do you speak best to your consumer in the way in which that it resonates for them? Like, sometimes we speak out, like we, as a company, like even I think at the little gym, like we spoke out at parents, or I'm working with a pharmaceutical company at the moment in terms of like how they position their product. And I'm like, but we need to turn that around of like, how do you capture the imagination of your consumer and what do they want to hear? And then develop your marketing strategy. And I think that like often we're much quicker to say what we want to say as opposed to what we want people to hear. So I think that that's really key. And I think once you've locked, like I worked with a great guy who was developing his company, and he was like, I have 3 personas. Here are my 3 people that I sell to, and this is what they want, and this is what they like, and here's who they are. And he actually had them on. There was a wall in his office with the 3 personas. They had names. Everyone knew their names across the company. Who are we building for? What's the message? And I just thought it was we talk about personas, but like he brought those personas to life. Like in the walls of his company, they were people, and everybody knew who they were, what they liked, what they did on Tuesday morning, what they didn't, I thought it's a really important way to look at how you communicate to your consumer. And I think like outside of that, then it's a mix. Like you got to trial and iterate based on what works. And I think you have to complement it together. I just think social media is such an amazing tool for people to be able to communicate today. Like if you think about before social media, like it was very hard to communicate to your consumer. Now actually the avenues are really broad open. Now it's a case of how do you actually cut through and how do you capture the attention of your consumer, which is actually, I think it's a better problem to have to solve than not being able to communicate to them in the first place. Like I remember back at the little gym, like this was before social media, well it was sort of early social media days, let's say, and we were doing some social media on it, but like there was so many advertising channels that just weren't open to us because we couldn't afford it. Like radio was too costly for us, TV was like not even an option for us. So like we were sort of doing like flyers, stands in supermarkets, things like that. But we outside of that, we were kind of limited in what we could do. And what I like about the world of social media is it's just opened the gates to everybody. Like if my ad is better than Coca-Cola's ad, I get the spot, right? Which I just think is fantastic.
You probably look back at your time at Little Gym thinking, I wish I had all of that back then in terms of influencer marketing or whatever it may be, just in terms of those ads. You must look back and be like, oh,
yeah, it definitely, we were probably more the the ad solutions and the opportunities today are just much more robust. But yeah, I think it's just it's a brilliant forum to just be able to get your message across.
What does the future look like for Meta then? How do you see things going? Obviously, there's so much happening with the metaverse and
Yeah,
so
it's
many different
exciting.
avenues. It must be so exciting to be part of it.
Yeah, I think I kind of think about, I suppose, being a mom, I think of my kids and what the metaverse will look like in their world. Um, and one thing that excites me a lot is around education. So we talked earlier around like visual people, who prefer to speak more or less, whatever that may be, right? And I think of the metaverse in terms of like how people can learn in a way that's going to be suited to them. So like for example, like as I said, I'm a visual learner. So like I would have loved to go back and learn about the pyramids and actually be able to walk through Egypt and look under the rocks and see how it was built, and that would have resonated with me rather than reading it in a book, right? So like I kind of think about the next generation and the opportunities of which they have to learn and what that's going to look like. Of course, there's going to be lots of fun in the metaverse. Like I play lots of games today, and there's going to be a huge entertainment side of the metaverse for sure. I also think about it in terms of science and development and equal opportunities. Like it's going to shift how we operate as a globe. Like we use Horizon Workrooms and work, which is our tool for doing meetings virtually, and the difference is unbelievable compared to on a VC. And I said to someone like, you can't really explain it till you do it. And once you try it once, then you're like, okay, I totally get this. Because suddenly I feel like I'm beside you. It's not just that you're on a screen, I'm talking to you. Your mannerisms are there. Like, I was with a colleague we were at a virtual event in Tel Aviv, and like he has this mannerism where he kind of he scratches the side of his face, before he talks. And I was like, oh my gosh, your avatar does your mannerism. I was like, I'm blown away. So there's something that's just the feeling in the metaverse is something that I've never experienced on video conference on any other medium, and I think that's going to be really interesting. I also think it's really cool where you can you're at a concert and you can hologram in your sister. Like that blows me away, and I just think that that's really exciting in terms of where the technology is going to go.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. When we're thinking of future podcast episodes and doing them virtually.
Yeah, totally. You could have all holograms contributing in as well.
In terms of that world and virtual reality and the metaverse, is there anything you think we should be fearful or cautious of kind of going forward, or
I think with any technology you have to look around the corners, right? And I think for the metaverse we've a huge amount of learnings from what we've built to date as to what we can bring forward. So I think we'll have to really think through all of the potential scenarios and build in robust policies, etc. So the thing I like about it is that we're very forward thinking on that for the metaverse, and I think we've a lot of history to help guide where we should focus. But yeah, for sure. And also being a mom, you have to think about how much time will my children spend in the metaverse versus in the real world, And I said earlier, I'm a huge sports person. I think sports really invaluable to children. And do I think it's better playing it in the metaverse versus on a pitch? I probably lean towards playing it on a pitch, right? The way I think about it though is how do I make sure that's balanced for my kids? So I think it's kind of all in keep it in an equilibrium. So my plan is to kind of fill them up with sports so that they, they enjoy the material world and all of that, and then use technology as part of their lives like we do, but it's part of their lives. It's not their whole life.
Before we finish up, I have a couple of quick fire questions that I ask all our guests. So,
okay.
Question one: do you ever suffer from imposter syndrome?
Yes, I think I do time to time. It depends. I go through waves of it actually, and I've yet to kind of reflect on when it happens versus not. But often, I find I get imposter syndrome when my confidence is down. So my confidence is high, I tend not to suffer from it. And when my confidence is down, it's when it creeps in. So I try to think about what are the scenarios in which my confidence will dip, and then how do I make sure that those circumstances don't happen, right? So I try to manage it, but yeah, I dip in and out of it for sure.
And what's been your biggest failure? What keeps you up at night?
My biggest failure. It's funny. I don't I failed at lots of things, right? But I try not to think about failure. I try not to think about failure too much. I'm a forward-looking person. I live in the future all the time, Like, even if something terrible happened yesterday, I quite quickly look forward and try to go, okay, that happened. I've learned from that. But my headspace tends to be in the future. Like, future Livy does lots of great things, you know. So I think I try not to over procrastinate about things that happened in the past, because it's over. There's not much you can do other than learn from what happened. I'm trying to think if I had to name a biggest failure.
I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Like, I have lots of work examples, but like, when I think about them today, they're quite small, you know. Like, and then I think, like, oh, like, someone's like, I might say, like, oh, I wish I had my kids younger because I had trouble having children, but like, that's my journey. That's what happened. You know the way. So, like, I don't really see it as a failure. More so, that was the path life brought me on. Maybe if I could have changed it, I might have. But like, you can't really control those things. So yeah, I don't really dwell on anything particular as a big failure.
Yeah, it's a tough question, because if you were to change those things, then obviously you wouldn't be the person you are today. So
Yeah. And it would bring you in a different direction. And maybe that was the path you needed to go to, you know, like, I am pretty philosophical about the path life brings you on. And sometimes, you know, when things happen and you really don't want it, I kind of go, okay, I need to be able to absorb this. You know, like, this is happening to me for a reason. And I need to be able to absorb this and figure it out. So yeah, that was probably like the hardest thing that I felt I couldn't control or do much about. But yeah, I don't really overly reflect back on things that went wrong.
Who's been your biggest inspiration, and has that changed over time?
I actually thought about it because you sent me this question before, and I actually thought about it a little bit. Like, I actually think it's my mom. I know it's like, my mom actually passed away when I was 22, so it's a long time ago. But I always go back to her, like, in my mind when I'm not sure. I kind of go to her, like, in my advice. I'm like, what would she do? What would she say? How would she advise me? And often something will come to me. But if I think of like who inspired me, like, from world figures and all of that, I'd probably say Nelson Mandela was one of my biggest inspirations. I read his book when I was in Africa. I was probably 22 at the time, give or take, and it really resonated with me. Maybe perhaps because I was there, and you know, I was reading the book in his country, but like, it made me kind of think about what was possible. Because what he achieved was truly he made what was impossible possible. So that he certainly has inspired me all the way along the way.
My next question was one thing you've read or watched that has changed your life.
I
think you answered that. Did
Yeah,
you?
well, The Long Walk to Freedom, if anyone hasn't read it, it's definitely worth a read. It's a phenomenal book.
Brilliant. What's the most important risk you took in your life, and why?
I definitely set up my own business. I jumped off. I left a very good job that was going really well to start something from scratch that I didn't know. Like, I didn't even know if, like, what it would, like, if I'd enjoy it, what it would be like. I just had this huge drive to start my own business. And I always felt like, if I don't do this, I'll be disappointed with myself. You know, I think actually, if you ask me the failure question, if I was sitting here now and I hadn't set up my own business, that probably would be my failure story, because I always had this drive to do it. So yeah, definitely just taking the leap. And sometimes when I meet people and they're thinking about starting up their own business, I'm like, go for it. You could always come back. It's not like the door is closed. It's not like, you know, time box it, you know, into 2 years, 3 years, whatever that may be, and see where the journey brings you. But like, it's a small period of time across the lifetime of your career. And I stepped out of corporate life for 5 or 6 years, give or take, maybe 5. I can't remember exactly the years, but like, it didn't make any impact on my corporate career per se, but actually I learned a lot, and it benefited me longer term in my own job.
Brilliant. The last piece now is just a pass the mic. So is there any leaders, any Irish leaders that you'd like to see or hear on this podcast, if we could get them as one of our future guests?
Well, for sure, I'd go for a fellow triathlete. So Anna Leary. I don't know if you had Anna Leary on.
No, I know Anna, yeah.
So she'd ask Anne to come on.
Yeah.
Tell her a fellow triathlete recommended her.
Yeah.
And then Sonia Flynn. I don't know if you had Sonia Flynn
No.
on. So Sonia was head of site in Dublin. Sonia actually hired me at Meta.
Okay.
She is fantastic.
Brilliant,
Yeah.
brilliant. Okay, when they get the call, then I can name drop you.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
No, look, that's been great. Thanks so much for coming onto the pod today. It's been
Yeah.
great chatting to you and obviously hearing your story. And yeah, it's been very inspiring. So thank you.
Absolute pleasure.
Cheers.